Hey, what's up, guys? Today we have a special guest, an economics professor from Ohio, whose school was directly impacted by the coronavirus when several students at his campus became infected. He's going to talk to us today about his thoughts on the coronavirus and the U.S. economy. So whether you're a student of economics or not, this is relevant to all of us. Stick around. It's a warm day in Chicago, and I'm doing my part with a Chicago pizza to stimulate the economy.
What I think it's difficult for people to understand is that, we take so much of our surroundings for granted. We take going to the store and bread being there whenever we need it. We take going to Starbucks and there's, whatever coffee we want is there every morning. We do not have to call ahead. We don't have to go on a waiting list, right? All of that we take for granted, but we never see the intricate structures in the economy that make all of that work. And so I think when people begin to see how these structures can be impaired and negatively affected, and then how that impacts their lives, right, where they live, they're going to say, no. We want this to turn around as quickly as possible, and we want our lives to go back to something like what they were before.
It's time for another episode of the History Behind the Headlines. Okay, well today I'm very excited to introduce José Méndez. He is a teacher of economics at Cuyahoga Community College in Ohio. José, thanks for being on this episode of the History Behind the Headlines.
Yeah, certainly. My pleasure.
All right, and on this show, we cover U.S. history, world history, government, and economics. But today it's all about economics, with a little bit of economic history, if we can get to it, as we discuss the U.S. economy and the coronavirus. And so you could call this episode, I guess, the economics behind the headlines. But first, a little bit more information about my guests. Jose, how many years have you been teaching economics?
I've been teaching economics now for about 13 years.
13 years, that's a long time. Okay. And by the way, for full disclosure, should let the audience know that Jose is my older brother as well. So he's doing this out of the generosity of his heart.
Yes, and I have the honor of being the first guest. So
that's right. You're the first guest on the first guest on the history. This is our 7th episode, and it's the first one with a guest. So there's a lot of pressure on you today. Okay, but before we get started on the serious questions of today's topic, can you briefly just tell us, to the extent that you're willing and able, how the coronavirus pandemic has impacted your job at the college in Ohio, and then also your students' lives?
Well, like it has been for college professors all over the country, all of my classes have been converted to online classes. It hasn't been as hard for me as it has been for other professors who either shy away from online teaching or don't have a lot of experience. But that's been the biggest change. That I don't have really a lot of interaction now with my colleagues. It's more of a silo approach to education. If I want to communicate with my colleagues, we have to get on the phone or do some kind of distance socializing, as they call it now. And my students, those that were in my face-to-face classes, have had to adapt and change to an online format. That's presented some challenges, but so far it's going well.
Now you have extensive experience teaching online college, so making that transition was fairly easy for you. Is that correct to say?
Yeah, it was. It was. I typically set up both my online and face-to-face classes in a similar way. So when we had to make this conversion, I just had to tweak a few things, and I think it was more of a challenge for my students than it was for me, actually.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It seems like the challenge would be greater on their end if they're not, they're used to that face-to-face. What about the students themselves? And I read a story that there were some students specifically at your school who were infected with COVID-19.
Yeah, I understand there was about 3 or 4 of them, something like that. We haven't gotten a lot of information exactly about who they were or how bad the extent of their having the actual virus. We did hear recently that they are okay, they're recovering, but that's about all we've been told. And so far, I have not heard anything about any of the professors coming down with anything. So that's good.
But to your knowledge, none of your students, to your knowledge.
No, to my knowledge, they were not my students, as far as I know. Yes.
Okay. What about the students who are enrolled in your economics courses? What are they? Are they talking about what's going on in the economy? Are they asking you, their economics teachers, questions about what this all means? Are they worried?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of the discussions that we have now online revolves around what's going on with the virus. They're, obviously concerned about their careers. Some of them are graduating this year, and it's possible that we're not going to have a graduation ceremony in May. It's probably likely we're not going to have one. So yes, they have a lot of questions about what might happen with the labor market. How bad can this get for them individually as, students that are going to go out there into the world and try to make a career for themselves. So we have a lot of discussions about the extent of this. Could there be a depression, a recession, all of that stuff.
So I want to jump in there on that note, in terms of what your students are learning. Is it fair to say despite how horrible things are right now, that it's a great time to be teaching economics?
Well, it's interesting you should put it that way, because I think it is for two reasons. One is, I think this is a marvelous teaching experience, if I can use that term, on the importance of the free market. I think as my students, and as we discuss it back and forth, the students see how the market has been able, the free market, has been able to step up and just overnight produce all of these things that we are in need of, the ventilators, the masks, the other things that have to be mass produced now to cover what's expected to be a very heavy wave as the number of people that are infected by the virus grows. It's a wonderful moment to get them to understand, or at least I try to impress upon them, how it is that a free market is able to do this, and how it would be very challenging, if not impossible, for a more centralized, socialized economy to do it. So it's been a wonderful tool for me to try to get that message across.
Yeah, clearly the economy is on everybody's mind, and I'm finding even on young people who themselves are being affected by this, by losing their jobs. But you used a lot of terms there, and upperclassmen in high school study economics, and of course students in college. But let's start by defining our terms. So when students study economics, they're introduced to terms that they may have never heard until they started taking an econ class, like supply and demand, how prices are determined. They learn about Adam Smith, the invisible hand, quote unquote. So this is my economics 101 question for you. What's the economic term to describe what we see happening around us in the U.S. economy today?
Wow, well that's a pretty involved answer to get into.
Give us the Cliff Notes version in layman's terms.
Right. Well, I think
I'm sure you can speak for an hour on this.
Right. No, I think one word that comes to mind is the term scarcity. That's a term that sometimes students have a difficult time understanding, and this is a wonderful time to get them to see what that means, right? I mean, we have a shortage of masks, we have a shortage of ventilators, we have a shortage of all sorts of things that are needed for medical people and first responders to respond to this thing. And so this is a wonderful time to explain to them, why is there scarcity? What does scarcity look like? Well, you're looking at it. This is what scarcity looks like. But on the flip side, as I said earlier, I get to pair that with the importance of a free market to be able to step up and meet that scarcity and eventually provide all that's needed. So I think scarcity, in terms of a teaching term, a teaching tool, would be a good word.
at scarcity and of course, and how to best respond to that in a free market, I imagine.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so I kind of want to get your thoughts on something here early in the conversation because I want to be crystal clear about what we're not doing in this interview. So we are not debating whether rich people's wealth is more important than people dying. But let me briefly explain what I mean by that. So this weekend, the newspaper of record on the economy in this country, the Wall Street Journal, published an article, and I'll include a link to it in my notes, about how everything has changed in about a month's time. The article is "The Month Coronavirus Failed American Business." And of course, they're talking about last month, the month of March. And I just want to quote this brief portion of it because it's a good summary of some of the major ways that the economy has changed in 1 month. And then I want to get you to react to it. So the article says the month of March was, quote, "unlike anything American business has experienced. The U.S. entered March still riding an 11-year economic expansion. Unemployment was at 3.5%, a 50-year low. The biggest worry for many companies was finding workers to fill open positions. But by the end of the month, 10 million had lost their jobs. Their airlines were on the verge of bankruptcy. Countless small businesses failed." And then the Wall Street Journal article says this: America's 500 biggest public companies were worth $3 trillion less at the end of the month than they were at the beginning. So this is my question. We can't even fathom what $1 trillion is, much less $3 trillion, but we can easily grasp a sick person being carried away on a stretcher, in an ambulance by paramedics. That we get. But companies losing $3 trillion in value in 1 month, Jose? So my question is this: is pointing that out, that loss of $3 trillion in 1 month, is that the same as arguing that rich people's wealth is more important than people dying? Or is it possible that businesses, or in fact the entire U.S. economy, can be sick, and we should care about the health of the economy?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And I personally don't like when this debate that we're having about whether or not, the economy should be given more attention, or whether, the number of people infected by the virus should be given more. I personally don't like when it's put in those terms, lives lost due to the virus versus the money that's lost to business. I think people can connect better to this idea if we explain to them that when we use the word economy, what we're talking about is you and me. It's all of us together, working and servicing each other and providing services to each other. It's the small business person, the mom and pop shop. They saved for years. They got a loan. They opened up a small business. They're finally, they were finally making money. They were probably using the business to put their kids to college. Now all of that has been wiped out, right? It's people, it's graduates that graduate from high school, and we're looking forward to that, first step in a career. And now all of that has been put on hold, right? So it's best to think about this as when the economy is affected this way, what we're talking about is also lives. It's human lives that are being affected by this. So it's good so we're not talking about lives versus money. We're talking about lives versus lives. In both events, lives are being affected in a very negative way. And, eventually the virus, we will find a cure. The virus will move through the population, do the damage that it's going to do, and we will then go on, all right, and move forward. When you do something like this to an economy like ours, right, the effects of it could be long-standing, and they could be around much longer, way after the virus is gone and it's no longer a memory. The negative effects on the economy, given the way we've decided to respond to the virus, could be with us for a very long time.
Okay, and I want to get your thoughts a little bit further on that, but I just want to point out, I like the way you explained it as not about lives versus money, but about lives and lives. So we need to care about both. Thanks for emphasizing that. So, but on your point there regarding the impact on the economy, I read an article about the Spanish flu and how the city of Austin, Texas, shut down for an entire month during the Spanish flu, and this was after they initially sort of dismissed the flu, and then shut down afterwards as they continue to see more people dying. So I know that that's just one city, and here the shutdown is from sea to shining sea, you could say. But my question is, can the U.S. economy absorb this 1 month of being shut down like we're currently being asked to do now? And if so, how long do you think the U.S. economy can support this type of business shutdown? And I know you can't go into a crystal ball, but I kind of want to know, you think, how long we can ride this shutdown?
Yeah, no, that's a very tricky question to answer. If we do this for just a month, I don't see the economy facing impossible challenges to overcome it quickly. However, if we get into a situation where we're doing this for 2 months, 3 months, you see, part of the problem is that when people hear the word economy, right, it's an abstract term. It's hard for people to get their mind around exactly what that means. But what an economy is, it's all of these relationships that exist. Some are formal, some are informal, that have to do with the various ways that we serve one another, both nationally here in the United States, but also internationally. Remember, this is something that we're doing basically in most of the world. This is the civilized world for the most part doing this thing. So there are going to be a lot of unintended consequences that occur because of this, many of which cannot be known ahead of time. And when you have something as intricate as the modern world economy as we have now, all I can tell you is the longer we do this, the more that structure that we've created, both here nationally and internationally, gets battered, gets bruised, gets changed forever. A lot of businesses are not going to return. A lot of jobs may not return. And so, from an economic point of view, my desire and concern would be for this to be done at the shortest possible amount of time. If you're talking about 2, 3, 4 months into the future, yeah, we could be looking at not just a recession, which I believe we're in now, but also a depression very similar to what we experienced during the Great Depression, and which lasted for over a decade. So this is something that we really have to be careful about, and we have to make sure that we're making the right decisions.
So you're saying it's a global recession. Okay, I want to go back to the Great Depression in a moment because, but I want to see if I could press you on this. You said you've been teaching economics. What did you say? 13 years? 13? Yes,
that's correct.
Oh, all right. So in your 13 years, first of all, I want to know, have you ever envisioned anything like this, any type of this scenario being possible in our economy? But then I want you to tell us what you think, lay it out for us. What is the best case scenario that could result from what we're doing now, assuming certain steps were taken? What would be the best case scenario? And of course, the doctors are looking at these models and they're always adding data to it, and they're saying, well, here's sort of the worst case scenario. If we do nothing, here's a better scenario if we take certain steps. But could you tell us what you think is the best case scenario and the worst case scenario for the economy based on today's circumstances? And can you put it in layman's terms as much as possible?
Right. Well, the best case scenario would be one where this is done for the shortest period of time, maybe nothing more than a month, and the people can be allowed to go back to work, and the economy can be allowed to start healing itself, and so that this recession that we're in we won't be in it for any length of time. So hopefully, as we proceed towards the end of the year, right, we could see greater economic growth and things begin to turn around. So that would be the best case scenario, that we have a quick turnaround. The term for this is a V-shaped recovery. There's a lot of hope about that. The president has mentioned that he's hoping for a V-shaped recovery. Some economists think that that's possible. I can tell you, the longer that we're doing this social distancing and this dampening of economic activity, the possibility of this V-shaped recovery becomes smaller and smaller. So now, what's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is that we don't let the economy come back as quickly as possible, and we then enter what could be a worldwide depression, where capital formation doesn't occur anymore, meaning that businesses are no longer investing, businesses are no longer growing. And yes, we could be looking at a worldwide depression, much like we had prior to the Second World War. And by the way, that depression had a lot to do for the rise of, right, the totalitarian that I would hope policy people and policymakers would learn is that throughout that whole time period, from the crash of 1929 through the beginning of our entry into the Second World War, the government tried everything. Money was spent. The Roosevelt administration, they tried everything. Most of the government agencies that we have now were created during that time period between the crash of 29 and the Second World War. So we tried everything to get the economy back. But let me say this: the unemployment rate.
Most of the agencies we see today, the government agencies, were created as a result of the Great Depression. You're saying?
Exactly. But my main point here is that throughout that time period, with the government doing so much, we never got back to pre-1929 unemployment levels until the beginning of the Second World War. So for that whole decades-long time period, with the government doing essentially what we're doing now, which is pumping a lot of money, trying to stimulate the economy, it never happened. The economy did not start to grow until, right, the economy was allowed to become productive and produce things. So I hope one of the things that I hope the policymakers in Washington understand is that we can't spend our way into prosperity, right? If we could, then we really wouldn't have to worry about economic productivity. We would just ask the government to spend more money. We need to get the economy to be productive again, and you do not get there with social distancing. It just will not happen.
Interesting. Well, I'm looking at our time here, and I see that our time is fastly running out. I could go on and on, but I promised a listener that I would ask this question. When they found out that I was going to be interviewing you for this channel, they said, well, could you ask this question? And so I'm going to put this question before you. Given that the current administration is spending upwards of $2 trillion and most likely more to stimulate the economy, this person wants to know, why can't we do the same? In other words, why can't government just create this money, create $1 trillion to forgive all student debt? Now, wouldn't that be wonderful? Forgiving all student debt. Why doesn't the government do that? What say you?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if we actually end up doing something like that. If not that very thing, the government seems to be the mindset now, and this is both political parties, seems to be that yes, let's get the government to bail out anything and everything. If it walks, talks, and cackles, we need to bail it out. One of the things that I try to get my students to understand, that as wonderful as wiping out everyone's debt may sound individually, right, for each individual person, one of the problems with printing money is the negative effects of inflation. And sometimes students have a difficult time understanding what that means. And, it's nothing more complicated than, say, you go to a farmer's market and you're selling apples. And you find that you pull up with your truck and you start to sell the apples, and you thought you were going to get away with selling them for 50 cents, but you're finding that you can sell them for $1, twice more than what you expected. Well, what do? You immediately call your cousin down at the farm and have him bring over another truckload or two of more apples because you want to you want to benefit from this higher price that you didn't anticipate. Well, what happens when you flood the farmer's market with tons of apples, right? Well, the price of the apples is going to go down, and this is what happens to dollars as well. When you flood an economy with excessive amounts of money, the value of that money falls, and you need more and more of that money to buy the same amount of things. And if it gets out of hand, right, you're looking at scenarios like, again, Germany had back in 1929, where it had hyperinflation. The inflation becomes, it's called galloping inflation, hyperinflation, and that can ruin, it's going to ruin the middle class in a severe way. It's going to ruin anybody that has savings, anybody that has assets, and it's going to make it very difficult for everyone just to live and get by on a day-to-day basis. So, yeah, we want the government to not do this for a lengthy period of time. And, you can make a case that given the emergency, government has to step up to sort of meet some of these needs, but you don't want this to be a long-term process, and you don't want the government to come in and bail out everything and everyone. It's just not a very good idea long-term.
Well, on that note, I just want to, again, thank you for being the first guest on my channel. And
my pleasure.
Perhaps you'll be willing to come back for a future episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it.
That's all I have for now. So thank you for watching. And if you'd like to know more, be sure to read the notes that I left in the description with some links for additional information. Also, feel free to comment. I do want to know what you think, any thoughts that you might have. I'm looking forward to learning from you as well. And if you have some questions, go ahead and leave it there. And also, I'll have a new video soon. In the meantime, if you want to make your life more pleasurable, feel free to hit the subscribe button. And remember, the past is never dead. It isn't even past.